You know what's strange? Two people can walk into the exact same opportunity on the exact same day with the exact same amount of money in their pocket, and only one of them will see it. Not because one is smarter, not because one works harder. In many cases, the one who misses it is working significantly harder. They see the same opening. One brain files it under possibility. The other files it under risk I can't afford. And that single act of filing, repeated a few thousand times over a decade, produces two completely different lives. Here's the psychological paradox at the center of this. The brain that stays poor is usually not malfunctioning. It's often doing its job extremely well, solving the wrong problem brilliantly for years. Today, we're going to look at what actually separates a rich brain from a poor brain. Not the habits you've heard repeated 100 times, the underlying wiring, what's happening neurologically, why it forms, and what it genuinely says about the person carrying it. Researchers have a name for what happens to a mind operating under financial pressure. They call it scarcity mindset. And the key finding is that scarcity doesn't just change what you think about, it changes how much thinking you have available. In a widely cited set of studies published in the journal Science, behavioral economists found that people under financial strain performed measurably worse on standard cognitive tests, while the strain was active. Same people, same tests. The scores dropped when money pressure was switched on, and recovered when it was switched off. Read that again because it's the whole video. The deficit wasn't in the person, it was in the bandwidth. Psychologists describe this as cognitive tunneling. When a resource is scarce, attention narrows onto that resource with extraordinary intensity. In the short term, this is a genuine advantage. People under scarcity are often sharper at immediate trade-offs than people who've never had to make them. But the tunnel has walls, and everything outside the walls, long-range planning, patient opportunity, the compounding move that pays in 4 years, falls outside the field of view. Not ignored, not seen. Underneath this sit two structures worth naming. The first is the prefrontal cortex, the region handling planning, delayed reward, and abstract future modeling. This is the part of the brain that can hold a version of you that doesn't exist yet and make decisions on its behalf. The second is the amygdala, part of the brain's threat detection system, which responds to danger long before conscious thought arrives. Under sustained financial stress, research suggests the balance between these shifts. Threat processing stays elevated. The planning system runs on reduced resources, and a brain in that configuration doesn't stop making decisions. It makes excellent decisions on a shorter timeline. There's also a measurable effect called temporal discounting, how steeply the brain devalues a reward the further away it sits. Everyone discounts the future. But under scarcity, that curve gets dramatically steeper. 1,000 now can genuinely outweigh 5,000 later, not because the person is foolish, but because their nervous system has been trained on an environment where later was never guaranteed to arrive. That's the poor brain, not lazy, not stupid, correctly optimized for an environment where the future was not safe to bet on. And this pattern rarely begins in adulthood. For a large number of people, the wiring is laid down much earlier. In households where money arrived unpredictably, where a good month could be erased by a single unexpected bill, where plans were made and then quietly abandoned enough times that the child stopped making them. A young brain in that environment learns something completely rational. Don't build on ground that moves. Take what's in front of you. Don't attach to outcomes that require the world to cooperate for 6 months straight. That's not a defect. That's a nervous system doing precisely what it was trained to do, by an environment that taught it well. The problem is that the training doesn't expire when the environment does. Now, here's what changes. The first shift is that the time horizon extends before the income does. People who build wealth from nothing almost always widen their planning window before anything in their bank account improves. They start making decisions on a 3-year clock while still living on a 3-week one. This is what delayed gratification actually looks like in practice. And it's far less glamorous than it sounds. It's mostly boredom. Long stretches where nothing visibly improves, and the only evidence you're right is that you haven't stopped. Psychology consistently links wealth accumulation to this single capacity, not intelligence, not risk appetite, the ability to value a future reward at close to its real weight. They don't need this year to feel good. They need it to be worth something later. The second shift is that identity separates from circumstance. This is the one most people underestimate. Many stay stuck because poverty stops being a condition and becomes a description. People like me don't get those. That world isn't built for someone like me. And once that sentence becomes identity rather than observation, behavior quietly reorganizes to protect it. Psychology shows that behavior tends to follow self-image far more reliably than self-image follows behavior, which means the sequence most people expect, get the money, then feel different, usually runs backwards in the people who actually make it. Their circumstances stay identical for a long, unglamorous while. Their self-description doesn't. They stop treating a temporary condition as a permanent category. The third shift is that emotion stops driving execution. Fear, humiliation, frustration, rejection, the rich brain feels all of it. This is not a video about becoming a machine. The difference is what happens in the 90 seconds afterward. Most people make their most expensive decisions inside an emotional spike. They quit inside it. They spend inside it. They burn a relationship inside it. And because the emotion feels like information, the decision feels justified. People who build wealth learn, usually the hard way, usually expensively, to put distance between the feeling and the action. Not to suppress it, to let it finish before they move. Therapists working with high reactivity clients often teach a version of this called cognitive diffusion, the practice of observing a thought without merging with it. Instead of, this is a disaster and I have to fix it right now, the reframe becomes, my brain is generating alarm right now. One pulls you straight into action. The other buys you a gap. It sounds like a small distinction. In practice, it's the difference between a bad week and a bad decade. Because the decisions people make inside emotional spikes tend to be the ones that are hardest to reverse. The feeling isn't the problem. Acting at its peak is. The fourth shift is that uncertainty becomes tolerable rather than terrifying. Building anything from zero requires acting before the outcome is knowable. No guarantee, no timeline, no confirmation you're not wasting years. Most brains avoid that state. Predictability is metabolically cheaper, and a nervous system trained on instability craves it more, not less. This is exactly why the people who most need the upside are often the least able to reach for it. And it's the cruelest part of the whole mechanism. Successful risk takers, research suggests, aren't people who enjoy danger. They're people who've learned to size it. They take positions they can survive being wrong about, which lets them stay in the game long enough for one bet to work. And that last part is the whole mechanism, quietly stated. Almost nobody wins because a single decision was brilliant. They win because they structured their attempts so that being wrong was survivable. And then they were wrong repeatedly without being removed from the board. The person who bets everything on one certainty isn't taking more risk than the careful builder. They're taking a different shape of risk, one that only needs to fail once. They're not braver, they're just still playing. The fifth shift is that attention moves from status to skill. There's a version of ambition that's really just image management, the appearance of arrival, purchased before the arrival. The pattern in people who genuinely rise is inverted. Attention goes into becoming valuable on the reasoning that capability generates opportunity, opportunity generates money, and money can generate the appearance later if it still matters. Which, notably, it usually stops mattering. There's a reason status is so magnetic to a brain under scarcity, and it isn't vanity. When resources are thin, social standing is genuinely protective. Being seen as someone who's doing fine has real consequences for who helps you and who writes you off. So the pull toward looking successful isn't shallow. It's another correct adaptation, running past its usefulness. But skill compounds and image doesn't. An image has to be maintained at increasing cost forever. A capability, once built, keeps paying without further payment. One buys the symbol, the other builds the thing the symbol was pointing at. Here's where I want to be careful, because this subject usually gets this part badly wrong. None of this means poverty is a mindset problem. It isn't. Structural conditions are real, they are heavy, and no amount of reframing dissolves them. Anyone telling you otherwise is selling you something. What the research actually shows is subtler and, I think, more useful. The poor brain is not a broken rich brain. It's a mind that adapted intelligently to an environment where planning was punished and vigilance was rewarded. Those adaptations were correct. They kept people alive. The difficulty is that they persist after the environment changes. The tunnel stays narrow after the walls come down. And that's not a character flaw. That's how nervous systems work, which reframes the whole project. It isn't about becoming a different kind of person. It's about noticing which decisions are being made by a system that's still defending against a threat that has already passed. That noticing is slower than advice and far less satisfying. But it's the only part of this that has ever reliably moved anyone. So, extended time horizon, identities separated from circumstance, emotion decoupled from execution, uncertainty made survivable, and skill valued above image. Money tends to come after all five, rarely before any of them. Because before someone builds wealth, they usually have to build a mind capable of surviving the part where nothing is working yet. That stretches where most people are lost, and it's almost never lost for lack of information. It's lost because the mind carrying them through it was still running instructions written for a world that no longer exists. Of those five, which one do you think is genuinely the hardest? The delayed reward or the identity shift?